Few countries in the world can boast the rich trucking legacy that we here in New Zealand take for granted. Having no real domestic truck building industry of our own, New Zealand became reliant on importing trucks, and while other countries were protectionist about their truck manufacturing industries, we weren't shackled by those limitations and were free to draw from nearly every market around the globe. We didn't have much of a choice in the matter and ended up buying from anywhere we could. The net result was that this country ended up accumulating an incredibly diverse range of vehicle types over the years. Being geographically isolated has also meant that what arrived here usually stayed here. After 100 years of buying from wherever we could, New Zealand has become a treasure trove of old trucks. There are not many places around the world where great American brands such as Fargo, International, Rio, Chev, Dodge and Nash could be found working side by side with Leyland, Foden, Morris and Merck. However, getting large numbers of these old trucks together is as hard as herding cats, and it took a special occasion late in 2007 to truly galvanise the classic trucking community, and enthusiasts around the country were kick-started into action, and it spawned the biggest classic trucking event New Zealand has ever seen. The straight shipping ferry, Santa Regina, spends its days bridging the gap between the North and South Islands of New Zealand. She usually carts a fair proportion of the hundreds of B-trains, quads, reefers, car transporters and the other rigs that keep this country operational that cross Cook Strait each week. She's like a second home to many of the truckies that ply their trade over both islands. However, this particular crossing was real special and a bit out of the ordinary. Many of the rigs on board weren't exactly earning their keep for a change, and in fact most of them had been taken out of retirement for a long lap around the South Island. Mixed in with the working rigs were around 30 classic veteran rigs that intended to circumnavigate the South Island. Their numbers would grow by the day until by the time they reached Invercargill at the south of the South Island, there would be around 140 old-timers congregating in Southland to partake in the Bill Richardson Commercial Memorial Rally. The trip would take nearly 2 weeks from the day they departed the Santa Regina to when they rejoined her. Once off the ferry, the trucks had a head count, then headed off to Nelson around the Queen Charlotte Sound Scenic Drive, which was a reality check of what was to come over the next couple of weeks. It's a world-famous bit of road. They don't come much more scenic than the Queen Charlotte. But tarmac doesn't come much more convoluted than this, and this road needs plenty of concentration. But these rigs were in holiday mode, and were either running bobtail or were just carting enough to take the bounce out and make the ride acceptable. Many of these drivers are professional drivers in real life, and they relished driving bobtail on demanding roads, and despite the obviously deteriorating weather, the trip was already off to a good start. There was a healthy contingent of international drivers down from the north, and R190 driver Jerry Story was one of the keenest.
This truck was bought brand new in Mount Maunganui by George Haast, 1965, and it was a logging truck bought, spec'd as a log truck. Then it went to Newmac Transport in Otago, who cut timber and whatnot with it, and then they repowered it with a Scania, originally a petrol engine. They repowered it with a 6-cylinder Scania, which later went on to blow up crankshaft, and then Leylands Transport, Robbie Hartstone brought it and repowered it with the Detroit as it is now, with a 6V71. fitted a 10-speed road ranger to it, and then I ended up with it. So that's how it's come about. It goes alright. Yeah.
Like most of these old rigs, there are compromises in the comfort department when on the road.
It's got to be the happy medium. It's either wind the window up and cook, or wind it down and deafen yourself.
The International 190 series was one of the great trucks of the day, and there are plenty of reasons why this classic model is so popular for the modern driver, many of whom saw these trucks in action as young boys and thrilled to the sound of the hard-working Jimmy. By the time the rigs had reached the Pelorus Bridge, they were starting to get the hint that the South Island has its fair share of one-lane bridges and more corners than you can wave a gear stick at. Then come the hills. Nelson's ringed by them and never got to join the National Rail Network because of them. This region, more than most, came to lean heavily on trucking for its posterity. Both Rye and the Whangamoa saddles between Blenheim and Nelson are still a good workout even for a modern truck. And while the road has been sanitised these days, in past times it extracted a stiff penalty on trucks. We found this bit of old footage showing local Nelson operators, Kirby's, at work in the 60s. And most of us might have thought that the days of seeing these Bedfords and Leylands grinding over the hills was over. But there were plenty of restored octopuses, beavers, hippos and other icons from past days on show when the rigs assembled at the Pigeon Valley Transport Museum for an open day, where the public could view these classic rigs. Nearly everything Nelson produces, Nelson exports. And fortunately, there's a great photographic resource illustrating how important trucks have become to the prosperity of the region. Few places have been as totally reliant on trucking as has Nelson. And from the shambles of little independent operators seen here in these old photographs, grew one of the great names in road transport, TNL, which had an enormous impact on the region and without question was hugely instrumental in building the economic base of the region. A large proportion of the convoy headed to Farewell Spit just to bag the bragging rights about taking their rigs from the northernmost drivable point in the South Island to the southernmost at Slope Point later in the trip. Another day, another saddle. This time it's the Hope, which links Nelson with all points south, and the boys are relishing the big climbs and unleashing their trucks on country most of them have never driven before. The Hope Saddle used to be a major obstacle to heading south, and it's only in recent years that it's been tamed. For much of its life it was a one-lane dirt track. Perhaps the most impressive of the Internationals is the ex-military F230D, John Douglas, or JD as he's better known, operates. She was one of 6 of this model put to work for the New Zealand Army in 1967. She worked as a transporter for the Army and still sports a winch behind the cab. Bob Ellis from Rotorua has one of the more distinctive Internationals.
It's a 1961 VF 195. It was imported out of Vietnam in 1972 by Pocono Machinery. They took the V8 petrol and the twin gearboxes out of it, twin sticks, and repowered it with a Detroit 8V71 with a double overdrive 13 speed, still running on the 34-pound diffs. Everyone with a 190 or an International sort of likes to think that they're more classic than anything else, which they probably are. I think they are, only because I own one. But yeah, they are quite a nice looking truck, and there's not a lot of them left, you know.
This rare footage of an R190 in action shows just how hard working these modestly powered trucks were. A lot was asked of them, they usually delivered. It's no wonder the R190 series is such a sought after truck.
The timber lorries are splendid examples of the transport industry's adaptability. A load of logs delivered, the jinker, that is the trailer that carries the tail end of the logs, is given a piggyback ride back to the tree-felling site. Meanwhile, the laden truck forges ahead, past the beautiful rivers and lakes that abound in this wonderful countryside, to the mill or wharfside, as here at Tauranga, to earn valuable overseas currency. An awkward load to remove? Not when you use this method. A yank at that wire and... timber!
But this trip isn't just about the International. Leyland has just as an important role in New Zealand's diverse trucking heritage, and there are plenty of enthusiasts of the breed on this tour, such as the Caulfield brothers, who were driving a pair of stunningly presented Leylands on the trip, and both the Octopus and the Super Hippo were much admired. The further south the cavalcade headed, the wetter it became. The North Islanders and the Australians on the trip had to take the South Islanders' word that the scenery was pretty good around these parts, but it was hard to imagine, as the next few days were to become a test for demisters and wipers, as the West Coast lived up to most people's perceptions of it. Richard Wakeland from Nelson in his 38 barrel nose Ford V8 knew what to expect in this part of the world, but many of the others felt claustrophobic as they passed through the savage country around Lyle and the Buller, sites of long past goldfields. Some of New Zealand's biggest goldfields littered this region, and the Lyle was one of them. Lyle was a boom town and was the New Zealand version of Deadwood in its day. The roads around this region were so bad that in 1874, wagoners carried screw jacks as a matter of course to raise wheels out of deep ruts and had to travel in convoy for mutual help. Things were so bad that they were threatening to double the cartage rates to £25 a tonne at one point. Conditions were that bad for them. It can rain like this for weeks at a time, and for decades river punts were often the most viable means of travel in this region. Still, gold provided the impetus for putting in roads and bridges, and without the gold strikes of the late 1800s, it's quite probable that our convoy wouldn't be travelling this route. Not that they could see much of it due to the rain. Reefton is another famous gold rush town, and the local school put on a great feed for the convoy. Australians Murray Langford and Paddy Ward shared their thoughts on the weather.
The rain, yeah, we did notice the rain. It was much heavier than what we're used to, that's for sure. And all those corners it kept us on our toes the whole time.
Murray and Paddy were driving loaner trucks, both belonging to Barry Caulfield. Murray was in the spectacular W924 sleeper-cabbed Kenworth, and Paddy was piloting the tow truck.
Yeah, it's a bit different driving in the dust. Like there's just that much rain, you can't believe it, how much rain they have over here, and we get a lack of it over there. But now you have to pay attention driving over here. Look, you make some good drivers over here, I think. Yes. I'm glad I've got the tow truck on the back there. It just keeps the back end on the ground a bit, like better running around bareback. So. No, it's all right, little Kenworth. She's got plenty of turns from lock to lock, but I've got an old W model at home with the same steering on it, and I'm pretty used to it, so it's okay, yes.
After lunch, the convoy did a couple of laps around the school for the kids, and by now it was becoming obvious that the original 30 trucks was turning into quite a convoy. The rain had really set in by now, and the true nature of the West Coast was becoming apparent. Lots of single-lane bridges, lots of rain, plenty of bush, and of course, gold. The convoy took a detour and dropped in to see Alan Birchfield's monster gold dredge, reputedly the biggest in the world, which works on the Grey River just north of Greymouth. This gargantuan machine weighs 3,500 tonnes, is 170 metres in length, and can process 1,700 tonnes of alluvial gravel per hour. After another regrouping, the convoy headed into Greymouth, where they kicked off the White Bait and Wheels Week and provided a focus to start the celebrations.
By the time we got into Southland now.
Other rigs were appearing all the time, such as Croft's Caterpillar-powered R190, which the international boys took plenty of interest in, Dave Brockman in particular. The next morning it was more of the same. Rain, narrow bridges and more rain. Hokitik is a nice enough place, as towns go on a good day, but it's the country surrounding it that's truly spectacular. This is what the view could have been like out the window looking towards the Great Divide, but you can't rely on the weather in these parts, and you take what you get and just get on with the job. There was plenty of shelter at Evan Birchfield's mining headquarters at Ross, and the huge workshop sheltered some impressive gear.
These two machines here are the features of crowd control on the mine.
Most of the tour took the opportunity to crawl over the Chieftain and Centurion battle tanks for a close-up look, and that 8V92 Jimmy certainly played a sweet song to many ears.
I think we'll auction this off when we get to Invercargill. Raise a bit more money for the cancer kids.
We're in a 28 Model A open tourer. We've got the roof up, but no windows and no air conditioning to speak of. So it was pretty chilly, but a lot of fun. Somehow we missed the turn off to Reefton and ended up heading to Springs Junction all by ourselves. Once we got there, we had a bit of a plug problem and then headed over the saddle back to Reefton and ended up in a bit of snow, which was interesting. About 50 mil on the road, and windscreen wipers were struggling to say the least, but it was a bit of fun, something different.
But before long, it was time to mount up and head back out into the rain. The views were an almost permanent soft focus which gave an eerie, almost claustrophobic feeling to the landscape. The big mountains hinted of their existence in the mist. Rivers would come and go without warning, and the dripping bush and dim lighting made for a landscape that almost oozed menace. It's no wonder many of the early explorers nearly went mad while exploring this region. It also explains why they kept coming back for more. It's an entrancing place. If the windscreens weren't fogging as bad as they were, and windscreen wipers were a bit stronger, maybe the convoy might have been able to see a bit more, but there wasn't a lot to see. However, on a good day, there is some seriously impressive country on the side of the divide, but your luck has to be in, and ours wasn't this particular trip. But the West Coast wouldn't be the West Coast without the water, which keeps this side of the divide lush and heavily forested. Fox Township in the nearby glacier attracts many tourists, but there was little to look at for the truckers, who had to content themselves with more rain, more bridges, and plenty of water to look at. One of the most impressive of the visitors from the North Island was this 1319 merge into Otago. Paul Gleeson of Pahiatua filled us in on the history of the Leyland.
It originally belonged to Horswell Quarries in Christchurch. I got the truck in 1985 and restored it. It's a lovely old English truck. It's got a compression ignition engine, direct injection, with an overhead camshaft and an oil cooler. Particularly good motor, starts beautifully. It's coupled up through a 15-inch clutch and a 3-inch spigot to an 8-inch gearbox to worm drive discs and 6-rod suspension. It's got dual hydraulic brakes and 10 stud wheels. It was really a great truck, miles ahead of its time for 1935. The question's often been asked and never really answered is, why did the English stop?
The West Coast is a land of big landscapes, massive rivers, and tortured coastlines. and there was always something impressive around every corner when the clouds lifted. This beautiful 1966 WC2264 White was another much admired rig. Whites are a relatively rare beast in New Zealand and are much sought after by enthusiasts and collectors. Tommy's 2264 whetted many appetites. However, we did find a few shots of some of the White's siblings, and later in the trip, 3 road bosses joined the convoy in Southland. The road meanders down the flat coastal stretches of the west coast for much of the way until it reaches Haast, where it crosses the Haast River and starts to head into the interior and the awaiting mountains. The bridge is amongst the longest in New Zealand, and it might look a bit over-engineered considering how little traffic comes this way, but everything has to be over-engineered on the coast. The rainfall around here can defy belief at times. These big landscapes makes even Dean Fitzgerald's immaculate Western Star look minuscule.
It's a 1990 48-64 Western Star. I stripped it right down to 2 chassis rails and 3 axles and fully rebuilt the whole lot. I got the sleeper box out from America, and it's off a later model Western Star, so we've just modified the front of the sleeper and sort of join up with the back of the cab here, and yeah, this is it now.
It's a beautiful region, as this shot of Jackson's indicates, but our luck wasn't in, and we had to content ourselves with more rain. When you turn off at the Arawata, you're definitely taking the road less travelled, even by West Coast standards. John Nolan runs a well-respected transport operation out of Haast. He spent a lot of his life in the Cascade region. He took time out to lead the convoy into the hinterland and to give the boys a taste of the West Coast backcountry.
Oh, well, we sort of know what the weather's like around here, and she can come in pretty quick when it does, and you get so many people here like this, and I thought, well, we'll bring a B-train in and set up camp in it out of the rain. So, you know, and it's a good thing we did because we've had a few passing showers. So, yeah, so no, it's good. Good to be part of an expedition like this. Guys from all over New Zealand here, and it's good to show them some of our country. Yeah.
And what do you think of the quality of the trucks you've seen come through here?
Oh, the quality's excellent. Just looking around at some of these older trucks here, that's just unreal. Some of the work that the guys have put into it. And even some of the modern trucks, you know, no matter what type of truck it is, everyone gets a bit of enjoyment out of it. And it's just good to be part of it.
Ricky here's just informed us that the lunch is ready. If you like to, we'll try and find a box to collect some money on the way past. $10 a head. Yep. And excess is going to the local community for a heart monitor.
Yep, indeed.
Right. So yeah,
It's a tight bit of country, and an octopus takes a bit of work to get in and out. But Robert Puller, who was driving Peter Vincent's octopus, enjoyed getting back into the cab of an old girl such as this. He normally drives a Kenworth in the real world, but didn't mind going back in time and getting behind the wheel of the Leyland.
Yeah, I've been, the last 3 days I've been driving this. Well, the guy that used to drive me knows that he's been away for a couple of days. So, yeah. It's quite good to actually get asked to take over something like this.
Make you appreciate when you drive now, does it?
Oh, yeah. Still got a lot of time with these old things, though, yeah. Oh, here we go.
Next morning, the weather was still a bit murky, but at least the convoy could start to catch glimpses of the splendour surrounding them. It's big country through here, and the Haast Pass is a magnificent drive by any measure. The road follows valleys and rivers through pristine mountain forests for much of its way, but don't let the beauty of the surroundings distract you from the magnitude of the job of putting this road through. The big rainfalls, tough winters, remote camps and ugly terrain made putting up these bridges and the road a tough task. It was hard on men, it was brutal on machinery. The road was finally completed in 1964 when the two ends finally met, but it took nearly 3 more decades before this road was sealed end to end. Even today, the Haast Pass is one of the highest maintenance pieces of roading in New Zealand, and it suffers closures from slips and snow on a regular basis. Surprisingly, the Haast is the lowest of the passes that cross the main divide at 563 metres, but it has some steep sections that are a test for any truck, but none of these old-timers had a problem. Most of the rigs pulled in at Makarora for smoko after negotiating the Haast Pass to thaw out and have a yarn. Richard Wakelin and his 38 barrel nose Ford had a few problems back at Fox, which put him on the back foot.
The brakes are okay. The fuel problem turned, we went right through the whole lot, the tap on the bottom of the tank, and then the fuel pump, we changed that over at the Fox garage, and she still didn't go, so we took the carburetor to pieces and a bit of muck in the bottom of that, and she's been going like a rocket ever since. But that made me, I never left Fox Lassie until after 10 o'clock, which made me just about last in the line for everything that happened down at the Cascade and everything. But this gentleman from Auckland, he said, well, where are all these trucks? And I said, well, they've gone away down on a run. Oh, hop in and we'll go down and see if we can catch up with them. But we got into where the Scammell was parked in the corner in the creek there, and the other vehicles were coming out then, so he said, no, well, we'll only get in the cart if we go in round to, if we're going in and they're coming out, so we turned around and came all the way back out again. But no, it was good of him to sort of tried to catch up with me.
Fergus King was also giving the Model A a good look over after this hard climb.
Yeah, it's plenty on the stick, but there's just as much on the ground, unfortunately. We get out of here before they realise where it came from.
Why do you think why?
Did it come out the dipstick? Oh, the dipstick was just sitting up a little bit, but there's more than usual on there. The puddle's bigger than normal.
Once over the pass, the rigs have an easy run down the flanks of Lakes Wanaka and Hawea, where the rainforests fizzle out and the arid central Otago country starts to kick in. Perhaps one of the most admired trucks on this run is Barry Caulfield's Leyland Super Hippo, which is one of only 4 to reach New Zealand.
The truck and I go back a long way. There was 4 of them brought into New Zealand in 1970. They were assembled in 1968 for a South African company, and I just happened to be in Nelson at a vintage car rally when they turned up, and I got a job in the Leyland factory and got to help put them together, albeit they were only partially dismantled. So the association with the truck started then. By the end of '73, this particular truck still wasn't sold. My father was a carrier in the Bay of Plenty, and he almost bought it. And in those days they were known as Pommy Kenworths, and we let him know that if he bought it we'd finish and go and work somewhere else. Possibly one of the ugliest trucks we've ever seen was the description we give it in those days. But however, as time goes on, the ugliness has become quite appealing, and we've got quite attached to it. So we ended up buying a couple and completely stripping one, making we believe an excellent example out of it, and possibly one of the better ones in the world.
There's plenty for the enthusiast to see here, and the sensuous curves and elegant lines of many of these trucks are a testament to great design and an aesthetic that few modern trucks will ever be able to claim. Even though this region has much to offer and many would like to linger around Wanaka, the convoy has to keep its schedule, and they head out to visit George Wallace on his property just outside the town. George ran a transport on the west coast and had spent much of his life logging and transporting in the very country this convoy's been passing through over the last few days. His father operated mills before George took up trucking. George learned his craft driving GMCs for Tom Croft before building up his own transport interests on the west coast. He's a bit of a legend in these parts and is well known for his passion for international and Detroit diesel products, as well as for owning what is perhaps the most famous truck in New Zealand, Concorde. This LW 924R Kenworth was put to work by Mike Lambert in Tauranga as a logger in 1973, and many will best remember it in the North Island, with Alf Quaife behind the wheel for the first 7.5 years of its life. Barry's little 1972 923 Kenworth tow truck worked alongside Concorde when it was new as a logger, and we managed to find this picture of both trucks at the gantry in 1976.
I had the opportunity of getting another motor for it, a slightly more powerful motor with twin turbos on it, and we fitted that motor to the truck. When I got the truck, it was 475 horsepower, and I believe the truck now at full revs is about nearly 600 horsepower. But it certainly goes very well with the biggest loads that I can put on it. On the fifth wheel, which is twist locked on, I had the opportunity of getting a sleeper cab. I saw that Barry Caulfield had one on his truck when I was up at Wakatani. I saw that and I thought, well, that really makes the truck look nice, and so I looked around in Australia and America, and I found that I could get one in Australia that was for a W900, and so I got that and I fitted that onto the fifth wheel, and I've cut the back out of the cab. The rubber part, or the rubber seal between the sleeper and the cab, that bolts on when I mount the fifth wheel. So I know it's really a neat truck now, and it's really fun. It's great.
The Reid family goes back 5 generations in this region and have been involved in transport for 4 generations. Now operating as Upper Clutha Transport, the company started with horse teams, survived the Great Depression of the 30s, and eventually absorbed other businesses such as McLeod's from Wanaka. As the convoy marched through Luggett, where Upper Clutha have been based for generations, it must have been like stepping back in time. The history in that yard is remarkable, even by Central Otago standards.
I saw it sold new from Harvester in Timaru, and the grain farmer owned it behind Timaru, and we bought it at the clearing sale about 6-7 years ago, gave it a respray, painted the wheels the proper colour, they were scummy old black, and did the brakes, and we have worked her ever since. She has been our number 1 truck on silage harvesting, carting hay, put a about 3-tonne tandem trailer on for hay cartage, that type of thing. General farm work. It has only recently been put down to number 2 truck because we've bought a late Echo E-Series tandem drive for the heavier silage work. But this one is still our favourite and still worked hard.
The convoy overnighted in Cromwell and made their way to Kingston via the Kawarau Gorge, Frankton and down the lake. "82-year-old Stan Williamson is a legendary figure in trucking circles. He was the oldest driver on the trip. If you could apply the old cliche, big is good, to a truck, it would be to his 1975 Leyland Crusader, as this veteran logger cut a fine figure. More and more trucks joined the procession. The cavalcade was starting to build up a head of steam now. About 60 trucks on the road and more joining by the end. It seemed that anyone with an old truck had heard about the upcoming rally and was keen to join in. The weather was improving, at least the rain had gone, but the grey day didn't do the scenery in these parts justice. The nor'wester winds were kicking in as well, giving the old workhorses a bit of a tailwind for their final leg into Southland. Allied works within the Richardson group of companies. Bill Richardson himself took a great deal of interest in old fuel tankers. That Mack sits at the cutting edge of a lot of development over the years, and it was a great counterpoint to the old trucks it was sharing the road with, and a great reminder of just how far technology has come, and also how brands can come and go over time. The convoy was attracting a lot of attention by now. People were hanging over fences just waiting for this marvellous collection of old iron to steam past. Not far south of Kingston, the crew parked up for another brew-up, and the local cockies took many of the convoy participants up the hill by 4x4 for a gander at the scenery and a group truck photo. By now the nor'westerlies were really starting to wind up, and while it seemed like a good idea the day before to get some footage from a helicopter, it was pretty rocky up there. Still, it was a hugely impressive lineup from the air that seemingly stretched from horizon to horizon at times. Once again, we'd changed landscapes, and the arid central Otago ranges had given way to the lush green plains of Southland. The road started to straighten out, and the convoy started to look like a convoy, with clusters of trucks settling into their own respective pace as they crawled across the plains to Riversdale, where another brew-up awaited. By that evening, the trucks had finally reached Invercargill, where Shona Richardson, Scott and Joss O'Donnell, and museum curator Ian Ridd welcomed the assembled truckers and invited them into the new wing of the private museum. "199 trucks reside in this amazing collection, which houses a world-class array of trucks from almost every corner of the world." Next morning, the old-timers congregated at Southern Transport's yard just around the corner from the museum before heading out into the strong and very bitter winds that had built up over the previous few days. The trucks were free to choose from one of 3 routes around Southland that the rally organisers had planned, with most opting for the big loop. More trucks had arrived from far and wide. A number were taken out of Bill's collection for the rally, and what was trundling past was truly a breathtaking collection of trucking history. Rio, Nash, Chev, Ford, Leylands, Kenworth, Mack, Mercedes, Bedford, White, Dodge, Diamond T, Dennis, Austin, Fordson, Studebaker, GMC, International, Graham Brothers, Scammell. If you could think of it, it would probably be there somewhere. This ex-chemical cleaner Max Superliner was loaded with a British Pavements painted Scammell World War II winch truck and a Leyland Comet tractor. This stunning 1939 Diamond T404 is housed in Bill's museum and is typical of the standard of his collection. Southland's quiet roads and light traffic made for easy trucking. First stop on the day was at Ryle Bush's yard. Ryle Bush is a Richardson Group company, and they put on a great smoko and gave everyone a chance to go over the huge variety of trucking iron on show.
Yeah, well, I'm Barry Westrup. I come from Otago, and I bought this old truck here about 5 years ago. It was in a bit of a state. I bought it from Victoria, Australia, and when we got it home, we were a bit disappointed because it was worse than what we thought it was. But I was lucky to have a guy working for me that was very clever. And between us we managed to come up with this. It took us around about 2.5 years, and this is how she turned out. According to a chap that's on this rally from Australia, who knows a lot about these particular trucks, he thinks it was a line haul truck, trading between states in its original concept, being a 6x2 and big tanks and that type of thing. He thinks that, running from Adelaide to Sydney or something like that, Well, it's got a 265 horsepower it puts out. It's had a turbo fitted, but prior to me owning it. I think it's a 673 motor, and it's got a 5x4 transmission, which they call quad box.
After Smoko, the rigs headed through the sleepy hamlet of Winton before heading out into the wide open spaces of western Southland, out to Nightcaps before turning back to Invercargill. Southland is a place of big green spaces, and despite the howling wind that was making life unpleasant outside the cab, the views were special through the windscreen. The glistening snow on the Takatimu Ranges in the distance was a fitting backdrop to the classic rigs crawling their way across this verdant landscape. We stopped off at Thornbury for lunch, and once again this little town was a hotbed of old equipment, tractors and paraphernalia of a time long gone. It's truly marvellous what you can find in some of these little towns.
We've come from Mackay. It's a 1977 S83 Foden. Originally had a Rolls Royce in it. It's now got a Cummins 350. We've had it for about 8 years. Just runs perfect, yeah. Now on the back we've got a Guy truck chassis. There was an old fella from Mackay at a museum.
and he was fixing it up, but he has since died, so we're just transporting it to Invercargill. And the rally is just awesome, hey? All the trucks and colours and all the different noises, and yeah, people are very, you know, you can talk to them, and it's just brilliant, yeah.
Clive Taylor is another Mack enthusiast, and his little B-Series tipper was a favourite with truckers and the public alike.
We went overseas to America with motor trucks in 1995, and we went a tour around of all the plants, Allentown, where they build the Macks, which is the Mack capital of the world, and we went to this swap meet at Macungie, and it was just full of trucks and B models. There was lines and rows of them, all restored, and we just fell in love with them. Bill Richardson was there, and he actually spied a little green one that was for sale there and bought that, and I saw this little tipper and I thought, well, I'll have to have that as well. So that's where they came from, and Bill and I bought one each, and we got it shipped back to New Zealand via motor truck distributors, and then we went about getting it painted up and restored up to how it is today. We brought it back and did it up for the 25th anniversary of Mack Trucks, and it went to the truck show then. We got it going for that episode, but it's been parked in the shed at home for 12 years since then, so we've just got it out now and got it up and running and up to Warrant Fitness standard, which has been a bit of a mission, importing kingpins and lights and other bits and pieces to get it roadworthy for this rally. Well, I'm very pleased that I've come to this rally. It's really blown me away of the amount of people that have turned up from all over the country, and I had to make a special effort on behalf of Bill. I'm here because I think he would really have loved to have been here too.
The next day, new trucks and old lined up for a procession through Invercargill. Around 150 working rigs and 120 classic trucks lined up for the procession, which attracted a lot of local rigs as well as many from around the South Island. It was an impressive sight, but it was the old rigs that drew the most admiration. We've included the complete procession on the bonus DVD in this pack. John Syme was responsible for organising the trip, and he did a great job of it. Despite appalling weather for much of the trip, he managed to shepherd the fleet into Southland, and everyone was full of praise for his efforts.
Oh, good. It's it's been a bit longer than anticipated. I didn't realise how long a 10-12 day trip would be, but yeah, it's panned out pretty good. We've had a lot of interesting visits. People have enjoyed it, and that's the main thing. It doesn't matter what they drove or how they drove. That's the enjoyment everyone's got out of it, and that's all the thanks that you need, really.
The howling southerly hadn't eased much by the next day when most of the North Island rigs pointed north and headed up the Catlins coast. The Catlins is famous for some bleak weather. You only have to look at the trees to get an idea which direction the winds come from. It's a wild coast and usually bears the brunt of the Antarctic weather. There's nothing between it and the Antarctic ice shelves, and it often feels like it too. But before the trip north began in earnest, there was some business to attend to, and that was the handing out of tour badges, which Shona Richardson did at the Waikawa Hall.
Thanks, John. Cheers.
Thanks, Shona. It's been a privilege of mine.
You're just about to have me in tears, but I wasn't expecting this. I just want to say thank you so much for coming and joining with us over this weekend. Our family, it's been a real mark of respect, I think, to Bill, to see so many people come from so many places just to honour his memory. And I was thinking when I was driving down here this morning, this really is part of the country that Bill loved most of all, because his family originated from Wyndham when his great-grandfather came out in the 1860s. His great-grandfather started a coaching business from Wyndham down to Fortrose. We had sawmills around this area down at Blackhorn and Progress Valley, and Bill liked nothing better than getting behind a wheel of a truck and coming down to this area, and I thought it was just so fitting that we finished up here in the Waikawa Hall. So thank you for coming to Southland. I hope you've enjoyed your look around, and I hope and pray that you'll have safe travelling on the way back home. So thank you very much. And thank
you. 52 badges were handed out. John was praised for his efforts, and after a cup of tea, the rigs were fired up again, and they headed north in earnest. The Catlins has only been recently fully tar sealed from end to end, but it's still a fascinating mixture of wild bush and lush greenery. Paul Gleeson had his bull terrier back on the 1319 Merc for the trip north, and the old German rig had every right to be on the tour, as Paul explains.
The company bought the truck new in 1973 at the purchase price of $33,000 with a Demet stable air axle under it. We're not 100% sure what it's done. We say it's a million miler, but it's more than probably $1.5 million, but it'd be between 1.4 to 1.5. The original driver was Ernie Winterbourne, and that's why we call it Ernie. I've also bought a 1932 Chev down, which is on the back of Neil McDonald's truck. He kindly brought it down, which is the original company truck. We just celebrated 75 years in business. My father started the business in the 10th of October 1932, so it was really good to bring it down, and particularly timely with one of Bill Richardson's businesses, TSL, which celebrated at the same time, to be able to take these three vehicles down and have a great time in Invercargill. The Richardson family put on a tremendous function for us all, and we've thoroughly enjoyed it. Going down the west coast and coming back up the east, we've had a tremendous 12 days.
The Catlins will eventually spit you out into Balclutha, and this bridge crosses the same river that empties out of Lake Wanaka that the convoy crossed nearly a week earlier. The trip was starting to look like a circumnavigation after all. Barry Caulfield was still having cooling problems on the Super Hippo and reckoned that the truck wasn't used to the cold temperatures down south. But pretty soon things would start warming up significantly as they headed north and hit more nor'westerlies on the Canterbury Plains. Most of the South Island's population resides on the east coast, and from now on, every couple of hours would see them driving through a fair-sized town or city. First up was Dunedin. Dunedin was once the richest and largest city in New Zealand and benefited greatly from the gold rushes in central Otago. It too has a great trucking legacy, as these old photographs illustrate. Looking at some of these rigs, such as tractors and semi-units, the electric trucks and the 1920 era tippers, reminds us that there's not much new under the sun, and the technologies we enjoy today are a direct spin-off from inventive minds faced with similar problems to ours. Oamaru never got round to knocking down its old buildings like most of the rest of the country, and has some of the most marvellous Victorian and Edwardian warehousing and other big block buildings of their kind left standing in New Zealand. This rig, together with Barry's Super Hippo, reminded us of another big rig of yesteryear, Big George, a Leyland buffalo working for Dales.
A monster job? You call in a monster motor. In this case, Big George is his name. A pusher tags along at the rear to supply a shove when it's wanted.
North of Christchurch, the landscape has changed again. And now we're looking at the far side of the divide we might have seen on the west coast if the weather had been dramatically better.
And on the big construction schemes, work cannot stop for a spot of rain. It's wet and greasy underfoot, but this giant earth-moving unit makes easy meat of its task on the South Island construction site.
The trucking was pretty easy in these parts compared to other places in the South Island, such as Nelson, Central Otago and Dunedin, as much of Canterbury's quite flat. Christchurch has a wealth of trucking history as well, and the city was fortunate to have easy access to some of the best alluvial gravel deposits in New Zealand. Another feature of the South Island is that we still have most of the one-lane bridges on State Highway 1. By the time the convoy hit the Hunterlees in North Canterbury, the team had had enough of the long straight roads and the Inters were ready to get back into some serious cornering. Dave Brockman is another keen international diehard and takes great pride in his rig.
Hey, I've owned it for 17 years. It's powered with a 1692. Round about, it's meant to be 285 horsepower, but it's probably a little bit more. We've upped the injector size a little bit. And, yeah, so yeah.
She goes well.
She goes reasonably well. She's a good, honest truck. We still use it. Still slip transporter on it and shift a bit of machinery around on it from time to time. So yeah, she's got a lot of history. It was brought into the country about 1960, and TRT repowered it from a petrol into it had an 8V53 in it, and put this Spicer 4x4 gearbox into it, and then yeah, it was a logging truck. It's carted metal, carted timber out of Rotorua, a very well-known truck from Rotorua, carted timber over to Mount Maunganui, and then sat down in Waiho for quite a while, and I tried to get it 2 or 3 times, and finally the guy relented and I bought it, and it's about where it's going to stay, I think. I don't think we'll ever get rid of it, so I'll have to dig a big hole when I die, and she'll be going in the hole with me. Just something that's, you know, a real, you know, neat looking truck, and you know, as a kid, just about every second truck or better around Rotorua was an international, like logging trucks, and always had a passion for F1800s and these, you know, the old R200 or 190 or 195, and yeah, they're a timeless looking truck. You know, they seem to they'll look good forever, I think.
By the time the trucks hit the Kaikoura coastline, the weather was on the improve, and the boys relished the perfect conditions as they powered up what has become one of the most notorious stretches of road in the South Island. There's no doubting that the Kaikoura coastline is entrancing, but inland it's a different story. This part of New Zealand is one of the toughest you could put a truck into. But like elsewhere in the country, from the period from about 1910 to 1925, horse teams were squeezed out by trucks, such as these Leylands. It might have taken a bit longer in some places, such as further inland on Molesworth Station, where the only trucks that could handle the conditions were usually ex-military 4x4s, until the modern generation of trucks filtered through. Up until around the time of this tour, the Awatere Road rail bridge south of Blenheim formed part of State Highway 1. Through some lucky timing, Barry's Super Hippo was the very last truck ever to cross this bridge before it was decommissioned. Shame it had to be a North Island truck, but then again the Leyland was put together in Nelson, so we figure that squares things up a little. There won't be many truck drivers that will miss the old Awatere Bridge. It was a bone shaker. The new version has absolutely transformed this section of road for truckies. By now, the North Islanders were getting close enough to Picton to sniff the homeland, and the long lap was drawing to a close. The weather hadn't been kind. During the last few days coming up the east coast, the winds had been so strong that a couple of curtain-siders have been blown off the road. Our convoy wasn't too troubled by the winds, with most of them running as bobtails and all, but it definitely required focus at the wheel. The long lap was finally drawing to a close. It had been a great trip. The old gear brought out a lot of memories and enjoyment to people all around the South Island.
Just over 3,000 kilometres we've done so far on this trip.
And how have you, this is your first trip driving around the South Island. What do you reckon about the South Island versus the North? Is there much difference, or is it a whole different world down here?
Much different world. Right from the time we set foot in South Island, we've experienced cold showers in Nelson, earthquakes in Greymouth, heavy rain in Hokitika, torrential rain in Fox, snow in Haast. We've had it all. The only thing that's been consistent is the people. Very, very nice people everywhere we've been.
You forgot the winds.
Yeah, you're right. Well, that's going down one side. One in a lifetime trip for us. Every part about it has been special. The people in every town, the way we've been treated, all the way around the South Island. It's probably something we will never forget.